Okay, good morning. Maybe it's better for us to start our meeting today, yeah? Okay. And maybe we would like to invite the online guests to be mute microphone, and maybe you can turn on your camera as our meeting will begin shortly. Yeah. Good day, everyone. Good morning for Indonesian participant, student of Department of Urban Regional Planning, and bonjour, Professor Edouard, and also the colleagues from France. Yeah. Thank you for the time. Thank you for all audience for having us today. In this occasion, we will have an international lecture series. And I think we are lucky today because we have Professor Edouard Dequeker. Yeah. He is a chair of Urban Economic and director of the Advanced Master in Urban and Real Estate Management, ESSEC, France. And he will deliver a topic about planning in a mass-urbanizing world of French and Indonesian perspective. Okay, Prof. Edouard, actually, thank you for allocating time for us. Yeah. But before we move to the invited lecturer, it's better for us to listen the opening speech, creating and kindly open this meeting by head of the Urban and Regional Planning Department, Faculty of Engineering, Universitas Diponegoro. Please welcome Professor Wiwandari Handayani. Okay, just to open the ceremony. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, thank you Bu Wati. Thank you everybody. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning to all, to our distinguished guest today for the lecture series, Prof. Edouard. When I first met him, I was surprised. Oh, you're the professor from France, because I thought you are one of the students. I'm sorry. I see it as a compliment actually, because it means yeah. Thank you, Prof. Edouard. We are very happy to having you here, also with two students that joining our joint studio. Yeah, Ines and Marian, and also to everybody, our master students from Urban and Regional Planning Department, and also some of our undergrad students. Most of you, I think, is from the International Undergraduate Program, yeah, from our IUP program. I'm so happy to regard this as the opening, yeah, for the is it correct, yeah, Bu? Odd semester, yeah, odd semester 2022. I hope this semester is quite special, yeah, for all of us, because we start to do it offline. We have been doing in almost 4 semester online, and then last semester we start to do it a little bit hybrid, but now we start to do it 90% offline. Yeah, and I hope you all, the students, can adapt with the new normal after the 2 years of the lectures with the online, but now you have to do it offline. And I'm happy to open this with a special lecture series, as we already have our guests offline directly from French, because before we do all our lecture series online, but now I think this is our first lecture series that we can do it hybrid, yeah, Bu. I mean, with with Prof. Yeah, you are the second guest. Yeah, last month we also have the guest from the Munich, yeah, from Germany, and now from German we go to French. Okay, without make it any longer, please, I would give this over to Bu Wati and Professor Edouard. Thank you very much, and to all students, hope you enjoy the lecture. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Professor Wiwandari Handayani. And maybe we have reached the primary agenda. We will listen the lecturing from Professor Edouard Dequeker. And I think Mbak Ulfa, maybe you can share the curriculum vitae, but maybe I will read the curriculum vitae in English, yeah, because actually you already prepared the curriculum vitae in French. Yeah, okay. Professor Edouard Dequeker is a professor for the chair of urban economic and director of the Advanced Master in Urban and Real Estate Management, ESSEC, France. His areas of expertise focus on the dynamica of urbanization, the driver of location choices by people and business, the implementation of urban strategy and planning, and on the role of urban governance in the dynamic and sustainability of cities. He did the PhD on the comparison of Greater Paris and Greater London in terms of metropolitan dynamics and public-private governance from 1990 to 2018. So he mainly not only exclusive focus on large metropolitan areas, but also the world cities. Okay, I think it's time for you to deliver the topic today. Professor Edouard, the time is yours.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'd rather stand, if that's okay with you. Is it possible to share the presentation? I'll talk quite quickly about myself, but it's not the most important. So, yes, I'm a professor. I was a former student in the place where I teach now, so which is called ESSEC in France. Which is a business school. In a way, it's the equivalent of a university, but it's centered on business. So most of our students go work for the private sector. One of the specificity of this this business school in France is that it's the only one who's developed 35 years ago research training programs dedicated to the question of cities. The belief is that, and I'm going to try to explain you why, we live in very specific times. We see the world urbanizing at a rhythm and a scale that we've never seen in history before. And the result of that is that cities are increasingly becoming the scale in which the scale for economic, social, and environmental regulations, and political ones as well, and that we need to train professionals that have a transversal vision of urban issues, and they need to be able to understand both public and private issues when it comes to cities. So this is what we've been doing. You have two students here that have graduated from what is called the share of urban economics within this school. We also do some executive education, so we believe also in the training of professionals during their life, and we do research as well. From what I understood, part of you are newcomers, so you're starting a course in urban and regional planning. So basically what I want to tell you this morning, not to be too long, is basically what I would tell to new students choosing a course in urban and regional planning. So I'll be talking about large-scale dynamics, trying to illustrate them with the French context from what I understand of the Indonesian context, because before 10 days ago, I had never been to Indonesia, so I need to be very modest in my understanding of the country. But I think by trying to see what's happening at a large scale and trying to illustrate that with the two countries, the idea is not to give you a lecture on how planning works in France, because I have no time, and nor explain to you how it works in Indonesia, because I don't know, but raise questions that I believe you need to have in mind if you start and if you engage a career in planning. There are some important questions that you need to have in mind. So I'll be talking around 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll have time if you want a question question me on the presentation. I'll be spending most of the presentation on the first part, which is why do we plan? I'm not going to explain to you in detail the tools for planning in France, for instance, but I want to explain to you, to my view, why you've chosen wisely when you engage courses in urban and regional planning, because we live in unique times, and I think it's worth illustrating you why, and why you'll have jobs in planning for the decades to come, because the issues are considerable. And secondly, after having told you, to my view, the issues for planning, I'll do quick elements on some questions about how planning should be made, and the questions you need to ask yourself about who plans, so the question of the governance of planning, and some elements on the tools that are used in France and maybe in Indonesia if we have time. This is a graph from the United Nations. Basically, if you want to understand the dynamics of urbanization at a global scale, the best source at the moment is the United Nations, that computes statistics on the dynamics of urbanization in every country. Here you have in the graph, in green, you have the total rural population, and in red, you have the total urban population. As you can see, so the rate of urbanizations, which is to say the proportion of people living in cities as opposed to the total population of the world, was 30% in the middle of the 20th century. In 2007, according to the United Nations, the world has become urban, which means that the total urban population has overcome the rural populations for the first time in our history. Okay, and as you see, this trend is supposed to go up, go up until 2050 to reach almost 70%. I think we need some long-term perspective here to understand, in a way, the craziness of what's happening, because cities, to our actual knowledge, were born around 5,000 years ago, and the rate of urbanization at that time was around 2 to 3%, and it took almost 5,000 years to reach 10% in the 19th century, and then 30% in the middle of the 20th century, and then it's going to go up until 2050. So you see, there's an element of time that is absolutely fundamental. We live in 30 years something that we've never seen before in history. Okay, mass urbanization, very quick urbanization, and you're part of the countries that are experiencing it the most in the world, and that's very important when it comes to thinking about planning, because what you're experiencing is more or less something that's in France and in other Western early industrialized countries we've experienced over 200 years. Okay, you're living in 30 years something we've lived in 200 years, and this changes everything when it comes to being able to dealing with the issues. Okay. So the drivers to urbanization. Urbanization, if you think about it, you often think about people in the countryside going to settle in a city. That's part of the equation, but that's not only the case. So there are three drivers to urbanization. The first one is natural increase, basically. People like children being born in cities, so basically increasing the total population, migration increase, and then another element which is important, and I'm going to come up to this in a second, is called reclassification, meaning that when you have a city that grows, okay, it starts to integrate new areas in the surroundings that were not cities and are becoming classified as cities because new people under the influence of a city go work there, and then an area that wasn't classified as city becomes a city, which generates governance issues and administrative issues as well, because sometimes, and from what I understand it is the case here in Indonesia, sometimes we are missing in the new areas, new small areas entering the influence of a city sometimes lack the right administrative and political tools to be able to cope with urban issues. Okay, here Paris grows through natural increase. If I was to give you an example, it's called an endogenous growth. Okay, so the majority of the growth of Paris comes from birth. Okay, London is the exact opposite of this. I know lots of other cities in the world like this. London's growth is due to newcomers, international people settling in London. So you see the different way in which a city can grow, and understanding this is very important when you want to think about how you are going to build a planning strategy and a planning system. Okay, so we'll stay for one more moment into general methodology, but this is very important. Especially in the present time, since we are dealing with mass urbanization, our existing tools are often insufficient to think about these phenomena. For the vast majority of history, we had a coordination between the political scale of the city and the economic scale of the city. A city, you know, in the medieval version of a city, you had a city surrounded by a wall. It had its governance system, and the whole economic activity was very well delineated within these boundaries. Industrialization, what you're experiencing at the moment, what we have experienced essentially in the 19th century, generated vast urban sprawl here. Okay, so that's the example of Toronto, but it doesn't matter that much. Usually you have a central administrative city here, which is in yellow. And then, and this is something that started to happen in the world 200 years ago. You have an urban sprawl that moves further, overcoming the administrative scale. Okay, so there's a Semarang Lama here. There's a city of Semarang for administrative boundaries. But the reality of Semarang, the urban sprawl of Semarang goes way beyond. So that generates a question of the scale in which public and urban policies are implemented and the scale in which the city functions on a daily basis. Okay, so never think about administrative boundaries per se. Always try to understand what are the dynamics of urbanization and what are the scale in which the city functions. Okay, so you have a first scale that's non-administrative scale that you need to understand is what is called an agglomeration. An agglomeration is a contiguous built-up area. Basically, if you take Google Earth and you look at a city and you draw a line on the contiguous built-up area. That's what the United Nations considered as the definition of city in its urbanization statistics. Okay, an agglomeration. But in fact, and this is extremely important, I'm going to talk a little bit about Jakarta, and this is important if you want to understand the urban phenomenon. Starting in the 20th century onwards, the urban agglomeration became in itself insufficient to understand the true scale of cities. Now, and it has become true with the generalization of cars, basically, you have larger metropolitan scales that go beyond the urban agglomeration. Here, you see, because here, you also have people living in individual homes in the countryside, in pavilions that go work every day in the central part of the city, here. So we have developed worldwide other categories, mainly called metropolitan areas, that are built on statistics of commuting. Okay, where do people live and where do people work? And then we can try to delineate a scale, an economic scale, a mobility scale for cities. And it goes beyond the contiguous built-up area. Okay, so you see, this is a very complex phenomenon if you think about it. And then you need to understand that in order to assess the efficiency of a governance system and the efficiency of a planning system in such a context. Okay, this was purely methodological, but it was very important. So you have to consider and to compare administrative and political scales to socioeconomic scales, okay? Because contemporary urbanization happens, and the vast majority of things happening within cities happens outside planification, okay? Outside the grasp of planification. It happens whether we want it or not, okay? So this doesn't mean at all that planning is useless. It means that if you want to make planning efficient, you need to enter this issue by understanding that you are dealing with phenomena that are happening in any case. And then you assess the limit of planifications in order to truly respond to the demand that you very well analyzed. Okay, you start by analyzing the urban demands, understanding the dynamics, and then you think about a strategy. Never think about the strategy without the understanding of the dynamics. Otherwise, you're blind in what you do. Other phenomena, and I'm going to come to France, the French case and the Indonesian case. We've been talking about the dynamics of urbanizations, mainly the growth of urban population. There's another phenomenon that is typical of what we've been living in the last 30 years, is the growth of large cities. So there's not only the urban population growing, we have the number of large cities growing. So we have people living in small cities going to medium-sized cities, and from medium-sized cities to large cities. This is another internal phenomenon that is important because it generates specific issues about very large metropolitan areas. Jakarta, of course, we'll talk about it, but not only. This is the world in 1990. It sheltered 10 megacities. A megacity for the United Nations is a city that shelters more than 10 million people. It's called a megacity. That's just a term, okay? There were 10 megacities here. So you can see New York, you can see Los Angeles, Mexico, Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires, Bombay, Tokyo, Seoul, some of them, okay? And then that's more or less today, 33 megacities, right? From 10 to 33. You can see here, Jakarta appears. Jakarta became a megacity in this time. And we'll see for the projection, this number is going to grow again, essentially in Asia and in Africa. So coming to the French case, just to give you some insights about the French case, so you understand the issues we're facing. We call the French urban system. So an urban system, basically, if you take a country and you analyze its urban system, you look at the urban hierarchy. What's the ranking of cities? What are their populations? Okay, it's called an urban system. Basically, you have systems that are called primate or macrocephalic, which means that there's a large domination of one specific city, and then a gap between the large city and the secondary ones. That's called a primate urban system. The French case is typical of a primate urban system because this is the mirror of a process of state construction, the consolidation of a central government that took centuries, and that went along with the growing of a very large capital city and the limitation of the counterpowers of other cities. Okay, so you have a system in which you have the Paris region here, 12 million people, over 65 million people in France, okay? So basically 20% of the population. And then the secondary cities, Lille, Lyon, Marseille, Bordeaux, Toulouse, Nantes, you can see here, here. They're between 1 million and 2 million people. So you see there's a gap of 1 to 10 between both, okay? The only comparable system is the English one in Europe to France, okay? Two very old state constructions and two primate systems. Okay, this is different from other countries like Spain, Italy, Germany, in which you will find cities of intermediary size, okay, between 3 to 5, 6 million people, because these countries were independent provinces before they were very late in history unified as countries. It's especially true in Italy and in Germany. So you have intermediary size of cities because they were capital of former provinces. So you have more balanced systems here, and you won't find in France cities of this size, intermediary size. Okay. So the first thing in understanding the urban system today, the metropolitan system in France works in a very hierarchical way between Paris and these metropolitan, these regional metropolises through the high-speed train. So, you know, we are a nation of engineers, so we enjoy building infrastructure, trains, and basically we have many national companies that operate at a national level. So they have their headquarters here, they have regional headquarters here, and people move between Paris and the rest of the region very easily. So it's a very hierarchical system centered on the high-speed train. Okay, so urbanization in France, once you've understood that, basically, so you're typically in a country that was industrialized, started its industrialization in the 19th century, such as England, the Netherlands, Germany, the United States. So urbanization is behind us, basically what you have to understand, okay? So we became urban in 1931. So the urban population overcome the rural population in 1931, which is quite late as compared to the other European countries, for reasons I can tell you about it if you're interested, but this is quite late. But you see, it's basically our urbanization happened in the first part, or in the middle of the 20th century, and today it's still growing quite low and until 80%. Okay, but it's behind us. So we're in a different times as Indonesia, who's still experiencing its mass urbanization now. This urbanization is behind us. This doesn't mean that we are not experiencing transformation within cities. Essentially, and I'm going to try quickly to explain you why, we're experiencing two processes at the same time, just like England, just like the United States, just like other countries. The first one is called metropolization, which means this is an effect. So I'll tell you about this a bit later. It's important. The dynamics of urbanization through history depends on mainly driven by technological cycles. Okay. And since the last 30 years, we have had a dot-com boom, so major technological evolution. The internet, and the internet has changed the specialization of activities, and basically is the driver for this urbanization. This metropolization mainly means that we have an increasing level of high-skilled tertiary activities in headquarters, in business services, in financial services, in research and development that take step by step a larger part in the economy. And these activities, basically, they locate in central parts of large metropolitan areas. So the metropolization is the increase of gross domestic product and high skill employment within central parts of large metropolitan areas, which drive prices up. So basically, we have a problem in these large metropolises of housing becoming very, very expensive, a competition for land. So this is metropolization. It has good and it has good effects, it has bad effects. Okay, we're experiencing that, especially in the Paris region, which is our world scale metropolis today. So it's becoming more difficult to find a place there because it's becoming expensive. And also suburbanization, which means that since these cities shelter a higher and higher share of employment, people move to these large cities because this is where you have economic opportunities. So the area of influence of these cities keep expanding. So you have these suburbs with individual homes, the use of cars that keep growing and growing, which generate problems in terms of land consumption, in terms of mobility, because it expands the mobility, the time of daily commuting, and so on. So at the moment, the problem and that many other countries are trying to face is how to limit the consumption of land for environmental purposes, for mobility purposes. And trying to do that means you have to move back, or in a way limit the expansion of cities and densify. at some points, okay? Promote public transport instead of cars, densify, and so on, okay? So this is basically, if you want to understand quite schematically, the two main trends that we're experiencing at the moment. So our main issues at the moment, I've been trying to summarize them very schematically so that you understand the questions we raise, and we have very common questions. So the first one would be called urban competitiveness. So in a way, how to make our cities always more attractive for newcomers, for investors, for companies, for tourists, and so on. So at the moment in the Paris region, we have this project, this massive transport projects called the Grand Paris Express, which is supposed to link, I'm not saying it works, I'm saying that is what we do. Which is supposed to link some areas, clusters with a strong economic specialization so that the strengthening the competitiveness of the Paris region. We have a major issue linked to housing, as I said, for the question of prices, because it's becoming more and more difficult to build homes because local mayors that have gained powers, I'll come back on that, are increasingly reluctant to build more homes. So we have a question around land speculation. So there's an housing crisis at the moment in France, and that is ahead of us. Of course, as we are preoccupied by the question of sustainability of our cities. So we don't have, of course, for obvious reason, the same flooding risks as in Indonesia, but we have also problems in terms of limiting the place of cars within cities for air quality, question of energy efficiency. We have question on the evolution of the the coasts for the increase of the level of water and so on. So we have this kind of issues as well, and also a huge issue about inequality, because the effect of metropolization that happened in large metropolitan areas everywhere is an increase of inequality, spatial inequality, income inequality, and you can see here that's the example of the Paris region here, and you can see in red, dark green, sorry, rich areas, and in blue, in white, the poor areas, and this has been strengthened during the last 30 years. Basically, issues that you've known, that you know as well. But to my point of view, the main difference is that you are experiencing these phenomena in a very short period of time, which is, I think, makes it way more difficult in your context. So I ought to be extremely modest in telling you about what we do, because we, in a way, we haven't experienced the same difficulties because we've experienced them over 200 years. This is the projection. We're coming back to that. This is the projection here. As you see, so from 33 megacities, we're supposed to shelter 43, including 13 in Asia, 10 in Africa. Okay, so you see the evolution here, mainly in India and in China, with an unprecedented growth of the world population. Okay, so in terms of urban people, we are expecting 2.5 billion more urban citizens in the next 30 years. And this growth, 1/3 of this growth is going to happen in only 3 countries in the world: India, China, and Nigeria. Half of it is going to happen in 9 countries, and Indonesia is the 5th. Okay, so you have a lot of jobs, you have a good careers ahead of you, because you're going to have work to do. Basically, you live in a country that is one of the most rapidly urbanizing in the world at the moment. Okay, so when it comes to Indonesia, as I said, you see the time frame is pretty different. We became urban in France in 1931. You became urban around 2010. That's where the urban population overcame the rural population, and this is going to grow up very quickly. You might reach 3/4 of your population that will be urban in the next 30 years. Okay, so you see, again, I'm repeating myself, but the question of time is absolutely fundamental, because you have many people coming to cities, and basically demography and urbanization moves way quicker than employment dynamics within cities. So, which drives the informal sector up. Okay, so basically, it's an urbanization that is almost impossible to completely regulate and control because it's happening way too quickly. Okay, so the question of the kampungs, slums, the informal sector is something we've never dealt with at the scale in which you have to deal it with. And of course, then you understand that it's a vicious circle, because if the informal sector moves way quickly, it's difficult to find a development in which you can have returns on investment, taxes, so that you can finance even more amenities, even more infrastructure, and so on. Okay. The urban system, if I looked at it like with my foreign eyes, and again, someone who had never been to Indonesia until 10 days ago, if you look at your urban system, you would find some similarities between the French and the Indonesian system, in the sense that you have a dominant city, is Jakarta, okay, and other regional cities, mainly located in the Java Island, okay, that are expected to grow quite quickly in the years to come here. So I would say, okay, it's a private urban system like France, and in a way the gap between Jakarta and the other cities is not as high as between the Paris region and the secondary cities in France. But that's considering that Jakarta is only 12 million people. Basically, that's considering the city as only contiguous built-up area, coming back to what I said before. In fact, Jakarta is way more populated because you see the cities like Depok, Bekasi, and so on, they're already part of a vast conurbation that is Jakarta. To the question of scale, the question of definition changes everything in the story you tell, in fact. Okay, so I've read some, sorry. Don't know why. Yeah, I'm going to go quicker then. I've read some articles here. So you see the growth of Jakarta and many Indonesian cities, as I understand, is very linked, happens along railroads, and it's then very, very spread out. And here, if you consider what is called the Jakarta metropolitan area, this fact that some of you might have read about, that is called Jabodetabek. Okay, it stands for Jakarta, Bogor, Depok, Tangerang, and Bekasi. Okay, it's the way the true functioning socioeconomic scale of Jakarta. And here you're talking about an urban space of 31 million people in your census of last 2 years. Basically, the second largest agglomeration in the world behind Tokyo. Okay, so you see, you're telling a completely different story. So the question it raises is, how can you implement an administrative and planning system to deal with issues happening at that scale, in terms of mobility, in terms of water management, in terms of housing, and so on? Is it even possible? And how should we build a system with local policies and the ability to coordinate at such a scale? This is very difficult. Okay. And if you look at the urbanization of Java, it's really the term conurbation I would use, that is used in the literature, but because you find that in the dynamics you have different city centers, but the urbanization dynamics make them basically join into large conurbation. In Central Java here, clearly between Semarang and Yogyakarta, in the next 20 to 30 years, you will have a contiguous urban areas along roads. Okay, which raises some issues in terms, and we're going to finish with some questions around planning. This raises a question of non-statutory towns, basically new small spaces that are entering these urbanization dynamics, but are not, in terms of status, considered as cities. Mainly, they don't have all the prerogatives that they need as new towns. So this is a question of politics. This is an administrative question as well, and also the challenge for large-scale coordination of urban policies. Can you, if you want to coordinate at this scale or promote large-scale transport, what what would be the most efficient system? Is it a centralized system? Is it a system in which you give powers to provinces so that they can coordinate, like would be called inter-regional cooperation? That has been evoked in the, I know in the debates. I talked about it with Pak Bobby last night. It's difficult to implement, but this is the type of question I would like you to ask yourself. Given what you've analyzed of the dynamics of urbanization, then according to you, what are the issues that should be dealt and at what scale? Okay, because planning then derives from all this. Okay, if you plan the wrong issues at the wrong scale, you can be good planners, but it doesn't matter really. Specific issues, don't forget them. Something we haven't really known quite differently is the question of small towns and basically some very specific forms of urban-rural intermingled space, so that are called desacotas. You probably have heard the word. This is quite typical in the peripheries of large agglomerations as Jakarta. Here in Central Java, in which you have a lot of population, but you are still in a system that is quite dominantly rural, agricultural, but in which you find some spaces in which you have industries and agriculture that are very well intermingled, complex land issues. So the limit between the city and the countryside is quite difficult to assess here. So it's a very important, I think, concept you need to be aware of, the desacotas, if you want to focus on the planning of these kind of small areas and frontier between the countryside and the city. Quickly, and we'll finish quickly with the second part, which will be way shorter. As I said, urbanization dynamics are basically derived from technological cycles. This has been established by the literature, and I think, to my view, there's no doubt about it. So this is the model for basically the Western, if I was to be simple, Western countries, early industrialized countries that have known the industrialization in the 18th and 20th and 19th century. So there were different location dynamics through time here. The first one, from the mid-18th century to the mid-19th century, was a revolution linked to coal and steam machine, which basically created the first cycle of urbanization next to the areas in which you would find you would find this. So the kind of workers' village surrounding the natural resources. That's one period of time. The second one here, which is called the second industrial revolution, until the 1980s, was linked to oil, electricity, railroad, car, what was called Fordism. So it's a form of management of a large-scale repetitive production. The point is, this explains how urbanization over the last 200 years. And then there's the third industrial revolution that I evoked on the dot-com boom with metropolization effects. The point is, I think, and you're not the only country, all the countries that are booming at the moment, they're experiencing both at the same time. So basically, you're industrializing very quickly, but you're also living the dot-com boom. You're also living the metropolization effects as well. And this creates a very unique situation when it comes to thinking about planning systems. And I'm going to try to explain you why, because this period of time basically pushed in favor of centralized top-down policies, infrastructure, and so on. Okay? In the question, I can explain to you in detail why, but all the countries I mentioned in this period of time in the 20th century, they all centralized their system, and the planning was dealt with at the central government level because there was a strong need for infrastructure, for water networks, for train, roads, and so on. Okay? This pushes in favor of decentralized systems in which you need to be quick, you need to innovate quickly within cities. So basically, what has happened in many countries such as France since the last 30 years is decentralization of policies. Okay, so the central government transfers prerogatives to the local authorities. so that they can, organize themselves differently in different cities and so on, so that we can have more plasticity, quick adaptability of policies. Okay, so these are very different movements. You are living basically both industrial revolutions at the same time. So the difficulty, to my view, is that you have forces pushing for centralization, large-scale planning, the building of networks, infrastructure, and so on, and you have forces pushing for decentralization. And I don't have an answer for that. Should Indonesia give more power to local authorities to adapt themselves to levy taxes directly, or should we re-centralize power so that the central governments can be the one impulsing the strategy? I don't know. The difficulty in many countries is that you have the two forces, because you need infrastructure to deal with the rapid urbanization, and this calls for economies of scale and centralization. And you also need in your cities adaptation to very specific context that calls from local autonomy and decentralization of planning policies. Okay, so that's, to my view, that's the main difficulty. I'm going to be quick, 5 to 10 minutes, and so we can talk a little bit. So this is just to give you some questions about the consequence of that when you have to think about a planning system. So how do we plan? Two questions to me, two general questions. Who are the actors that you have to deal with, and what are the tools? Okay. This is France. I told you that because of the third industrial revolution, mainly, France has implemented this administrative decentralization in the 1980s onwards. So what does it mean? It simply means that the central government gives prerogative that it used to do it itself to local authorities that are elected, that have their own budgets, so that they can do it themselves directly instead of the central government. This is called decentralization. We have 3 layers of local authorities in France. We have the commune, what is called the commune. This would be a quota, basically, to be simple. One specificity is that we have a lot of local authorities in France. The other countries in Europe, they have merged the local authorities throughout the 20th century. So basically, they divided the number by 3 or 4. Okay, we still have a lot of small local authorities in France, and we've given a lot of urban powers to the mayors that are elected in each commune. So the mayors has a lot of power in terms of urban policies. It delivers the building permits. Okay, so if you think about large-scale cities, like in the Paris regions, for instance, okay, the Paris metropolitan area, you have 1,300 local authorities in the Paris region. Okay, so you have this number of mayors to deal with if you want to implement a large-scale planning policy, because you need the accordance of a lot of people. Okay, and then we have the département that would be the equivalent of your provinces, but mainly for social issues. And we created regions recently, because I think just like Indonesia, the question of state unity and state consolidation is very important. So the scale of the region is something that is quite difficult to apprehend in France. People don't know about this scale. They were implementing many for technocratic or political reasons, because this opens the debate of federalism, which is very, very difficult in France. So this scale have been created. We have reinforced them. To my view, it's not a good, viable option. Okay. One last specificity, so that you can understand some debates, is that I was telling you that we have a lot of small local authorities, local mayors. Okay. Now, this is the example of Lyon. In France, you have the metropolitan area of Lyon that is here. So then in a city, how can you coordinate urban policies if you have that much local authorities? So we have created, instead of merging the local authorities to reduce the numbers, we've chosen to create an upper layer. We call it the intercommunality, or basically a structure that coordinates the action of local authorities. so that local authorities can transfer budgets, transfer prerogatives to a higher metropolitan authority. Okay, it would be like in Semarang metropolitan area, for instance, the many different quotas would be gathered in a bigger structure that it would be called the Semarang Metropolitan Authority. Okay, this doesn't exist at the moment here. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do. There's a lot of issues that to deal with, but the question is, like, how can we develop metropolitan structures at the right urban scale to deal with these policies and coordinate the action of local authorities? I think that's still a major issue here. I'm going to go quicker just to finish because time is running by, and I want to give you some general advice to finish. We are two countries, from what I understand it, that believe in planning in the sense that we've developed zoning, we've developed policies with urban rules. Local authorities have to create local plans affecting space to different destinations. So we have a lot in common. Small digression: the British and the American system is very different, very different. Meaning that in a local authority in London, for instance, you can't have a borough saying in its plan, okay, I want 30% of social housing at this place. This doesn't mean at all that this is what has to be done. It's only a framework for public-private negotiations. So a private developer can come and negotiate with the local authorities and say, no, this is not viable. I'm only going to build 15% of social housing. And it can happen. And half of the projects that happened in London during the last 20 years were different than what was actually written on the plan. This is not possible in France. In France, the plan is a rule, and if you want to do something else, you have to change the plan. Okay, and I think we have, in a way, we have that in common. We are countries with a strong culture of planning. The problem with that is to not overestimate the power of planning, as I said, because if we want to make it efficient, we need to start, as I said, by understanding the dynamics and then start to build a strategy deriving from that. So what I would modestly give you as advice, I do the same with my students, is starting by this. You understand the drivers, economic change, employment, amenities, land and real estate. So start by the demand. Start by understanding what's happening. And even though you don't like what's happening. And then you understand the different issues that need to be tackled together. So don't deal with housing without dealing with mobility, without dealing with economic development, without dealing with land use and so on. Because cities, they're complex systems of interrelations. So basically, all this works together. Okay, the productive systems and the system of daily interrelations. Okay, so you need, and it's not easy, you need to be transversal in the way you're dealing with these issues, which means that your job as planners is not a purely technical job. It's a job in which you have to be able to connect different complexities, maybe manage the work of experts of housing, experts of mobility, and so on, so that you can coordinate the different expertise to push a specific strategy in the direction that you want. Okay, so the diversity of issues, and then the diversity of actors, because all the issues, all the scales that I told you about, basically they give you a diversity of actors in the city. You have public actors, you have local authorities, you have quotas, you have provinces, you have local neighborhoods, communities, you have the central governments, but you have other public actors such as a national company, a railway company, for instance. You have private sector. Never forget about it, the private sector. How you think developers, real estate developers are going to behave, how they will invest. If you try to develop a center for employment, you need to think about how the company that you wish to locate, what are its needs? Why would she locate in the place you're developing? What are its needs? So you start by the demand once again, okay? Don't forget the private sector. Try to understand how its problematics and how it thinks. Okay, and then you understand the multiple scales you have to deal with jointly. Okay, usually the liabilities of, I mean, French planners as well, is that they're in charge of developing a specific area. So this area was given by politics, for instance. Okay, we are going to regenerate this. So they just move directly into this area and they never consider any other scales. So they don't try to understand the interaction of the specific area with the larger scale of a city. Okay, and basically by doing that, you understand basically nothing. So if you plan an area, you need to be able to understand how this area is affected by broader dynamics. Finally, you built your strategy, and your strategy can be a planning, can be about zoning, but it also has to be about implementation. Always don't think about strategy without thinking about how you are going to implement the plan and who are the actors that will be involved in this implementation. We have that in France. Unfortunately, we have a lot of different planning documents that are made by people who have no operational culture. So basically, you just produce documents because it's what the law asks you to. And these documents per se, they don't have any operational power. You can write the documents. It's not going to change anything if you don't think about operationalization. Okay, and I think the conclusive word will be, of course, there's your technicians as planners. You're going to have a technical expertise that is going to be taught to you by your teachers. But planning is always political. Don't forget about that. I didn't have time to tell you about it, but we can talk about it. Planning is not only a technical issue. It's really it's a political issue. It's permanently negotiated. You have a large infrastructure projects delivered by your central governments at the moment. The question of how these infrastructure projects play a role in unifying Indonesia on a political level, I think is absolutely key. And the decision of making a new capital is probably driven by technical questions such as flooding, of course, but putting a capital outside of Java is a political gesture. Of course it is. We have other examples. Brasilia in 1960, the idea of putting a new administrative capital in the middle of a country was a political gesture. Okay, so you see, planning, it's not only technical, it's a strong political issue. So you as planners need to be to bear that in mind. Thank you, and I'm glad to have a discussion with you. I have like 20 minutes, I'd say. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Edouard, for the complete and interesting presentation. Yeah, I think we are in the discussion session for online participants. If you are ready, yeah, you can write the question in the chat box or raise your hand. And for offline participants, you can raise the hand. Okay, is there any question here? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Edouard, for the presentations. Just have a quick question to start the discussion. Maybe others would add something else. I just want to know, based on you mentioned about the steps or stages of urbanizations, right? From the previous until the current. I'm just wondering, in your perspective, with decentralization, for instance, you mentioned a lot about that, and also with the fact that at the current situation, we face the pandemic, and then we also face a lot of environmental issues that force us to control our movement from one place to another, things like that, to reduce the climate change impact and so on. I just want to know, how would you think when you said about the drivers of urbanization in the future? Do you have some words about that based on your perspective? You have mentioned a lot from the past until the current, but how would you think about these urbanizations for the future? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Burik. This is a very important question. Unfortunately, it's very tricky because it raises a lot of debates on the extent to which we can control large-scale dynamics. I mean, if we look at history, the sum of millions and millions of individual decisions, we can see some macro trends, and these trends, and we can see probably urbanization is one of the only unquestionable trends of recent history. Now, this raises a question of the intrinsic limits to that because natural resources on Earth are limited by definition. We don't know yet the extent to which, when it's going to happen. We know it's going to happen. It raises the question of energy. This raises the question of flooding, and I think if we pretend, I don't know, if we admit that that public policies can regulate and stop these large-scale dynamics for environmental purposes, the best way to do it, honestly, it's terrible to say, but would be through centralized, strong planification policies, and probably partly outside democratic context, because honestly, if you look at the individual behaviors, I think we are mainly materialist people, and we are looking for improving our level of being. And so if you decentralize and you have an array of local authorities that are elected, you have basically people that are going to try to be elected, and you have the question of time of mandates. So the ability to implement a system in which you can have a contiguous and coherent strategy over 30 years, despite political changes. So this is very difficult because I myself, I'm a Democrat, but the environmental issues are going to raise a lot of questions that are going to pushes, I think are going to pushes, and I don't think that's a good thing, are going to pushes in favor of autocratic response, possibly. Or there's another possibility, is that the adjustments to this is going to be made through prices, basically, because we're not going to be able to take planes as much as we are now, maybe. So either we forbid, or either we wait until the scarcity of resources pushes prices up, so that fewer and fewer people can actually take it. So this is another. But once again, this calls for so many philosophical responses. We have our own. So, but I think to my mind, this is how I would formulate the dilemmas we're gonna have to deal with. So I know I didn't answer your question, but I can't answer your question. It's impossible. We don't know what's gonna happen in this respect. But this is probably the most, I mean, it's scary, but it's the most exciting thing, I think, because as I said, we live in a completely crazy situation, and the next 30 years are going to be so different of what we've experienced over 5,000. And the environmental question will be at the center of it, because for the first time, we've changed our environment, and we are the cause of that. Our activity is the cause of that. But how? I mean, I could say, okay, we are going to stop. Who would I be to tell Indonesians or another country, no, because of environmental issues, you should not industrialize, as we've industrialized in the 19th and in the 18th and the 19th century? Who would I be to tell you that? But once again, collectively, because we all aspire to better living conditions and so on, we will be reaching limitations. I don't know when. And then I don't know, I don't know what's going to happen then, but I'm quite worried. It's only a question of dilemmas. It's terrible.
Yeah, Okay, thank you, Prof. And also Prof. Edouard. Maybe the other question, Fajar, maybe? Because you, oh yeah, okay. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Fajar. I'd like to ask you about the planning coordination in France metropolitan system. You told us before that Lyon metropolitan consists of so many commune. How many commune?
Yeah, commune. Yeah.
49 or 59 people?
Sorry, I didn't get the last part. Are you asking me to elaborate on the metropolitan power in France?
I mean, there are a lot of communes.
Yeah.
In one metropolitan system.
Yeah.
Just like you said before, Paris more than 1,000
Yeah.
commune and Lyon consists of more than 50 or 40 commune before. What I want to ask is how then the planning system, I mean, the coordination of planning integration for the metropolitan, is it what is it called? Make all the commune then do not need to do the plan anymore, or based on the metropolitan, or there are like a kind of hierarchy of planning.
Yes,
With
yes.
that, and
Yes, question makes perfect sense. Thank you. It's a very good one. As I said, unlike England, for instance, you know, in England, you only have one layer of local authority, except Greater London, which is a specificity, and it's only a very light authority, strategic, not operational. In France, we have 3 layers of administrative decentralization, and we have this commune, a lot of them, you're right. And we have given the mayors, because the commune has been historically very important for anchoring the Republican regime. So it's very important. It's because we are a country deeply of small, historically small farmers. So we need very local points of entry for administration, and we're very attached to that. Now the problem is when you have this urbanization dynamics and this metropolization, of course you have cities developing at a larger scale, and then if for any housing strategy, for any mobility strategy, you cannot have the approval of so many mayors. So instead of merging them to reduce their numbers, we have developed, but it's been only done since the last 20 years, what is called intercommunality, which is basically an upper layer that doesn't delete the commune, but it's an upper administrative layer. So now when you basically all the mayors, they sit in an assembly at the metropolitan level, and they need to the law makes them build a strategy for planning, a strategy for housing, and so on. Now the question is the rivalry between the local authority level and this metropolitan level, because the system is it's a political issue, but the system is not very well, it's not really efficient at the moment, because you have, first of all, this layer has no democratic legitimacy. It's not elected directly. It's an indirect election. So people don't really know about it. They know about it for transport purposes, because the transport network often has the logo of the structure, so they know about it more or less. But they have, it's theoretically, you're right, the planning strategy of this layer is stronger than the local planning by the mayors. Now the problem is the mayor still delivers building permits. So basically you can have all the strategy you want. In the end, if the mayor doesn't want to build social housing in his commune, nothing happens. So once again, the strategy is one thing, the implementation is another. So in theory, we've done that because we didn't want to merge commune, because we were afraid of the social effect of that. So we created an upper layer. We've given them priority, strong prerogatives, strong financial means, but we still have this opposition between the two layers, the mayors and the metropolitan authority. And at the moment, it doesn't work anywhere. The Paris region is the worst in this respect.
So the metropolitan authority is a kind of another government finger.
Yeah, absolutely. We really like to build layers in France. We have a lot of layers for everything, and it's quite fascinating to notice on the long run. We have all the structures that we create. Basically, they never die. So even though they're not useful anymore because, let's say, they've been created for developing a specific area and the project is over, the structure remains for decades. And it's really a long-term pattern. It's fascinating. I don't know why, but so we like to create things instead of we have a lot of trouble having existing things evolve. So we tend to create new things all the time.
Is it
It's supposed to be, because my belief is that in the present times, what I call the third industrial revolutions, the most efficient system are decentralized ones that function in a bottom-up way. What is called subsidiarity, meaning that by default, everything should be dealt with at the most local level. And then you only deal with specific issues that cannot be dealt at this local level. Mobility is one, flooding risk, water management is one. You need upper layers to do that. So theoretically, it's a bottom-up thing, but the way in which we were talking about that with Buwiwik, the long-term history, our culture, our representations are very strong. And in France, our long-term history is strong state consolidation and top-down policy. So even when we create structures that are supposed to be bottom-up structures, in the way we create them, they are top-down. They're top-down. So they generate resistance for local authorities, and now we're in this dilemma. And the system doesn't work, to be honest.
Yeah, I think we have a question from online. Yeah. Oh, yeah, okay. Maybe Mas.
Okay. First of all, I wanna say I'm sorry because I'm not fluent in English at all at this moment because
I can't speak a word of Indonesian.
I'm a freshman here, so maybe I will speak in Indonesian and translate. Pertama-tama saya ingin mengucapkan maaf jika apa yang saya tanyakan di luar topik atau tidak terlalu relevan dengan studi yang Anda teliti begitu. Namun saya berharap ini bisa mungkin menjadi insight lah untuk saya dan untuk Indonesia juga. Seperti yang kita ketahui, Indonesia adalah salah satu negara yang menjadi penyumbang oksigen terbesar di dunia, termasuk yang kedua. Sebagian besar daerah di Indonesia masih merupakan hutan-hutan. Bagaimana pendapat Anda mengenai dampak pembangunan kota yang terlalu masif di Indonesia dan di seluruh dunia terhadap keberlanjutan planet kita? Apakah saat ini kondisi siklus biogeokimia di bumi baik-baik saja dengan segala penanggulangan yang dilakukan oleh seluruh negara-negara di dunia? Atau apakah tidak baik-baik saja? Apakah negara-negara seperti Amerika, Prancis, dan terutama Jepang yang saya lihat memiliki teknologi untuk mendaur ulang dan melangsungkan keberlanjutan lingkungan yang lebih baik, apakah teknologi-teknologi tersebut sudah mampu menopang keberlanjutan bumi jika diterapkan ke dalam urbanisasi di seluruh dunia? Apa yang sebaiknya kita lakukan? Terima kasih.
Ya, thank you. Mas siapa
Oh, ya.
namanya?
Mohon maaf, lupa perkenalan tadi. Nama saya, my name is Muhammad Faridin Nugroho. Maybe you can call me Adin, or Din, or Farid.
Okay, thank you, Mas Adin. Yeah, actually, in the first time he take and apologize because maybe it is not related with your topic. Yeah, but it's okay, Mas Adin. It is our problem. Yeah. Okay, but he really wonder with this situation today, because actually Indonesia is one of the producer of oxygen in the world, But what do you think, about the impact of the massive development in the world? Not only for Indonesia, actually, maybe, but also for the other countries in the world. And
For, I guess, environment, sustainable environment.
Like
Yeah.
France, Paris, new technology can deal with the fact that we have a massive.
It's always. Thank you for your question. I'm always trying to be modest because it's so difficult to think to be definitive in what's going to happen in the next 30 to 50 years. Often this debate is summarized by a binary approach between growth and degrowth. Okay, so basically either we developed or we stopped developing, and we basically have our level of being decrease. My point of view, and I'm not the only one to say that, is that we are wrong in thinking that technology will be able to cope with these issues. But if we only say, okay, we just need to stop developing and so on, it's not very interesting, because obviously the moment in which we were not a danger for the planet is basically the 98% of our time that we spent outside cities as nomads and so on. Basically here we only lived for 15 to 20 years individually. Are we ready to do that now? I don't think so. So my point is, I think there are three drivers for answering the question of sustainable development. The first one is technology. Growth is one thing. For mobility, for instance, mobility is an issue in which we are going to need intense capitalistic investments because of public transport as opposed to individual cars, maybe electric cars, possibly. I'm not saying it's the answer, but mobility is the example in which we might need technology. Then there's what we call optimization. Optimization basically is that you have your constant level of developments, but you better deal with the resources, basically. So that's all the theme of circular economy, basically recycling and so on, so that we and with energy we have better we have our buildings that are more efficient in terms of energy. That's one thing. We have our level of developments, but we learned to better deal with our resources, be more. That's one thing. That's another response. And finally, you have what can be called degrowth, or you have sobriety, so basically what we are going to have to renounce to, basically. Maybe eating meat, or eating that much meat, taking the plane, and so on. That's one thing. For all the scenario I know, from the experts and so on, I know no scenario that renounces to one of these three drivers. So basically the question is, where should we put our investments? Where should we try to be more efficient with natural resources? And what do we need to renounce to? That's how I would formulate it. But the binary debate between growth and degrowth, I find it not very interesting for the answer. But to end with the questions, yes, I'm worried because we have an demographic explosion, mass industrialization, mass urbanization. So a lot of tension that are to come for natural resources. So strong geopolitical tensions ahead of us. So I'm worried. But I mean, we are going to have to live, and you're younger than me, so you're going to have to live in this world. So basically, it's no use. It's no use simply being pessimistic and do nothing, because we have to live. So you have to translate that in Indonesian.
catch the idea?
Yes.
Yeah, we must ensuring about sustainable development. Yeah, and actually the technology must cope with the problem. Yeah. By maybe circular economic, one of the example. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Maybe because the time is limited. Yeah. Okay, that must like. Only one more question.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. Something. Okay. Okay. Mas Imam. Okay, from Budona. Very valuable presentation, Prof. Edouard. Thanks for sharing. You said about how the metropolitan or city's resident will affect the city itself. In example, Paris, which has many indigenous people rather than London, with skyscraper building, which has a lot of new corners, yeah. Oh, newcomers. And it seems coming from investor. What do you think about the phenomena of many metropolitan in Indonesia, like Jakarta, Semarang, and so on? Thank you.
Yeah, so sorry about my English because I didn't say endogenous, like yeah, it's endogenous, which means that it's a city growing by itself in a way. So yes, you're right. There are different ways of growing demographically for a city. So Paris has international immigration, but way fewer than London. And London has based all its strategy on being the most attractive city for business, for tourism, for students. So it's very international. So, so the effect of that, many different effects of that within a city. Basically, it can create specific challenges linked to the spatial concentration of people sharing, which is a way humans behave. I mean, we have to admit that they locate within. If they are a newcomer, an immigrant in a city, it tends to locate in a place where you have people of the same nationality or the same origins. So yes, in London you can find in the Jamaican area, you find the French area. There's a so it's a very it's a patchwork of different villages. It can create. That's a difficult question on the effect of that. It can create sometimes challenges in terms of the offer. The retail offer, for instance, or how basically these different people coexist within a city. This is not a new debate. You might learn in urban sociology about the school of Chicago, the sociology school of Chicago. Chicago was the epitome of a city that has grown very quickly exogenously through international migrants. So you had very different ethnic areas and a lot of violence between these ethnic areas. So this is an old debate. I don't know the Jakarta case enough to answer the question. I'm sorry. We've been working about Semarang, and Semarang is at a smaller scale. The central part of Semarang shelters a mosaic of different communities. There's a formal Dutch area, but there's still an area with a Chinese community that is important. There's an Arabic area, there's a Javanese area, all in the center. It seems to coexist peacefully, but it can be an asset also for tourism, from promotion, and for building the identity of the city. So yeah, so it's difficult to per se answer to the consequence it can have. It can generate challenge of coexistence between different communities. Let's take the extreme example of South African cities that are very traumatized by the decades of apartheid. So here you have the example of a city in which the coexistence between communities is very difficult. So you have a phenomenon of privatization of cities, what you call gated communities. So basically you have residents basically developing their own private services together, with enclosure and door and a privatization of space. Okay, that can happen in the extreme case. So once again, yeah, when you have different communities, a lot of different immigration, the challenge is having these people coexisting and share part of the city, public space, equipment, and so on, so that you don't have the extreme effect of private space, special privatization. Yeah, I'm sorry, I have a train to catch.
Yeah. Thank you, Prof. Edouard. Yeah, so this is the end of the meeting today. We would like to extend our greatest gratitude for Professor Edouard Dequeker as the invited speaker. Merci beaucoup.
Merci à vous.
Okay. Also for all participants and guests of our friends for gracing our meeting with your presence and your kind attention. We really appreciate it. This is the end of the 5th International Lecture Series. Thank you and see you in the next ELS. Bye-bye. Au revoir.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe with us in front of